Well, hey there, everybody. This is Body Pal with the Android Anthem.
Hey, this is Steven.
Hey, Steven, thanks for joining us. This is episode 8 of the Mobile Blast podcast. It is April 22nd, 2018. And Steven, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the interwebs lately about Android security. Folks are probably getting scared because of things they've heard. And to be honest with you, it's been somewhat of a pet peeve of mine whenever I hear or read or see clickbait about Android updates or something like that. And a lot of my friends ask me questions about, is their phone safe? So, what do you think if we just take maybe about an hour and just discuss all of our thoughts about Android security and try to debunk a few myths?
Yeah, that'd be great. So I hear the same things that you're hearing as well, and especially with with security being in the news more so lately with the whole Facebook thing going on. A lot of people are wondering about, you know, is it safe to even use their phone anymore without personal information or other things? People able to access information from their phones. So yeah, I think that'd be great. Let's go ahead and tackle this.
I thought that maybe Facebook would actually be a really good place to start. And then maybe we could close it all off with providing some tips and feedback for how you should use your phone and stay safe, or maybe even your kids' devices if they're on Android and how to keep them safe.
Definitely.
So I got to let's do that then. Facebook. What happened with Facebook? So I got a little bit of data here to help y'all understand exactly what happened in the news with Facebook. So apparently there was no actual breach of data. There was no hack. Facebook was not hacked. And to be perfectly honest, Facebook didn't sell anybody's data. But that's kind of also the bad part if you think about it, because while in their terms and conditions that you agreed to when you created your account, they said they would never sell your data. But what they actually did was they sold access to your data on their servers. Kind of
Yeah,
shoehorn around the truth, isn't it?
just a little slippery slope, but
That's
yeah,
kind of unethical as far as I'm concerned.
yeah, one would think, but like you said, it's in their terms and agreements when you sign up for Facebook. It's also part of whenever you allow access to these third-party vendors to access information from your page, whether it be you take a quiz on Facebook or you sign in to another website using your Facebook login. You're allowing these people access. You're granting them access, I guess you can say, to your account. So
But that doesn't stop there. And
no, that's
here's
just
why.
beginning.
Android itself was caught up in this mix, if you will, because before, I think it was 6.0, where they started allowing you to individually provide access to different things in the operating system. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Stephen. Was it 6.0 or 7.0?
I believe it was 6.
So on your Android device from the get go, when you install an application, you used to get these pop ups that would say, this app wants to access your camera or your contacts or your SMS or your phone or your storage. And it used to be that you had to allow all of that. It used to be an all or nothing. In order to use the app, you had to give it permission to anything it wanted permission to. And that's kind of how Facebook got involved with tracking your extra information on Android that you may not have understood that they were actually tracking. With the newest versions of Android, Marshmallow 6.0, Nougat 7.0, Android 8.0, you now have the capability of turning off the individual settings. So, for instance, if Facebook wanted your storage access, you can say, okay, I'll give it storage access to my storage because I want to upload a camera. Upload a picture. But it also wants contact access. Well, I can't understand why it wants contact access, so I can turn that one off. And the app would still work just fine. If it ever tried to access your contacts again in the future, it will pop up again and you can deny it again. And that's the way it should work. Now, and iPhone, I think, has always worked that way. And that's good. That's a really good part of security, whether you're on an iPhone or an Android. But when you first started it, if you gave it that access a long time ago and never went back into the settings, it kept that access. And whether you knew it or not, it happened to be tracking things such as phone logs, text messaging logs, contacts, and it was all in your Facebook account. And that's part of the data that they were allowing access to this third party, and you just didn't know it.
Yeah, because it's like you said, you would go in there and you would just enable it, not thinking about it. Because, well, I have to use I want to use the app and I want to, do whatever I want to on Facebook, not knowing that you're accepting these terms, and you may not have known exactly what you were accepting, even though it blatantly said you want to allow Facebook access to your contacts, to your camera, to your phone, and all that. And when you use the Messenger app, that's another thing from Facebook, and it's the same thing. It's just, if you want to use it as your primary text messaging application, you could use Messenger to use it to make phone calls and whatnot. Well, unfortunately, you have to allow it access to those features on your phone and for those things to work. So,
and that's absolutely right. Now, don't be concerned. It didn't have access to what you were actually saying in your text messages. It didn't keep logs of your text message chains. It didn't record any of your phone calls. Although you may be using the Messenger app as your default text messaging service, it didn't upload and save those text messages. Those remained on your phone. But what it knew was, who are you text messaging? What is their phone number? And when did you message them? How often are you messaging them? Those are the types of data that it was tracking and keeping up with. And you can go into your settings, and we'll get into that later in the tips, but you can go into your settings and individually, for each of these individual permissions, you can turn them off for any application. There was something else that came up in the news recently, Stephen, and if you didn't hear about it, there was this research group called Security Research Labs, and they spent a couple of years, I think about 2 years, tracking and monitoring these Android security updates that are released on pretty much a monthly basis. And what these security updates do is, if there's a vulnerability, say with Wi-Fi, or a vulnerability with the phone application, or something that would allow a hacker to access your phone, these security updates and patches would pretty much resolve that. Once it's discovered, it would resolve it. So what this research group did, though, was they were trying to track how many or how much of these patches are actually being implemented into the phones. Take Samsung, for instance. They can update your phone with a monthly security patch, but that doesn't mean that every individual part of that security update was being implemented. And so they were questioning, and I'm sorry, they were creating a scale as to how safe is your device versus all the other Android devices. And let's just put a few people at ease. On the good side of the scale, you had Google and Samsung, which means that majority of all the patches with an update were being implemented. On the far end of the scale, like LG or Motorola, they may have provided the full-blown monthly update, but not every individual patch. Are you familiar with the story at all?
Yeah, I've heard bits and pieces about it, and I think we've discussed it a time or two.
So here's where I'm going to debunk this whole thought process. If you have a patch in a monthly security update dealing with, say, the processor, a specific processor made by a very specific manufacturer, well, that processor isn't on every individual phone. I mean, every phone has its own processor, right? Mm-hmm. And these processor manufacturers, they take very good care and research into their own processors. So they do their own patching, if you will. That doesn't necessarily mean that Google or Samsung or LG or Motorola care, simply because they're not using that processor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're explaining it well.
Okay. So I know this is a deep rabbit hole, but let's just say the ones that touch your specific phone, the manufacturer is implementing the patches if they are pushing the update. So for instance, you may not get every monthly update. However, any patch in that update dealing with your phone, you are getting. I know Motorola may not push out every update. In fact, they're probably months behind. Google's really good because, let's say Pixel 2, they made their phone. They control their security patches. Samsung does the same thing. It's not an Android problem, if you will. It's
more of a manufacturer issue.
That's exactly right. So let's just put the pun out there. We're not comparing apples to apples if you say iPhone to Android. You have to compare Apple iPhone to Samsung Galaxy, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's the other thing which I was going to talk about later on, was you have to be, I guess you have to have the knowledge of what device, you got to have more than just, oh, this device looks nice and whatnot. Or the price when you go in to buy it, you got to kind of know a little bit of the history of that device and how often does the manufacturer push updates for these phones. Like you said, Motorola, LG, and all them, they may be lacking, whereas the Google devices and Samsung, to a sense, are on the good side of that. So that's one thing you got to consider when purchasing a phone, is how often do these manufacturers push updates to these phones that would make your phone less vulnerable.
Absolutely. Now, personally, I've always thought of Samsung as one of those who does a better effort of trying to get your monthly security patches out there, but doesn't really care to get your operating system updates.
And that's where I was kind of, it's like they're kind of over here on this side with Google. Security wise, yes, you'll get the patches, you'll get the updates and whatnot, but they're a little lacking on how often do these phones get these new operating systems. I mean, you think about it, the Samsung S6 and 7 are, just now starting to get updated to make what would be considered a current operating system for them. So yeah, that's definitely something that everyone has to take into consideration when purchasing a phone.
Yep. So I say to all of you listening out there, if you see stories about, oh, there's a Wi-Fi vulnerability with Android, or there's a processor vulnerability with Android, and it's not specific, if it's very generic, that's just clickbait, in my opinion. That's trying to, if you read the whole entire article, I'd be willing to bet you 9 times out of 10 at the bottom of that article, they're trying to get you to either download and install their app or pay for a monthly subscription service of some type. What do you think?
Yeah, and that's another thing you got to. It's like you said earlier. Is you're comparing apples to apples in a way. Apple, there's one iPhone. I mean, there's different models, but it's the iPhone. So people like to compare Apple to Android all the time, whereas it's not necessarily like that. Like you said, Samsung has an Android version. Google has their own. Motorola, LG, and then you start going down HTC, all that. So when they talk about these vulnerabilities or slow to get updates and whatnot, or these phones aren't getting updates, you really need to do the research on it before forming an opinion on it.
What do you carry, Stephen? What's your phone?
Right now, it is the Note 8 and the S9. I carry both, but my primary one for my primary number is the Note 8.
And did security come into question when you were deciding which phone to carry?
It's on my list. And I'll be the first to admit it's not at the top of my list, but it is on my list of things to consider when getting a new phone.
Would you say it's in the top 5?
Yeah, definitely top 5. Maybe near that 4 to 5 range, but I take screen size and resolution, camera, all that into play. And security, like I said, probably about 4.
So how do you determine if that phone you're looking to buy, if that manufacturer has a good history or a bad history with security updates? Or I should say with updates in general?
Yeah, so just like I said, research. From experience, with Samsung in general, I've pretty much been in line. I've had every new model that has come out, and they've been fairly quick with the security updates themselves. The operating system, like I said, may not be as quick as it is on, let's say, Google, because it's Google pushing out, the updates to their own phones. That, and just also it's a carrier thing too. I know with operating systems being pushed, the carrier may limit the manufacturer on when these updates and even security updates are getting pushed to the phone. So you just got to look at the history of the manufacturer themselves.
So my number one tip for that would be, if you're not watching Android or listening or reading and researching Android all the time, like you or I would be, look at the phone you're about to buy. Let's say a S9, and then compare it to the phone that came out last year, the S8, and look and see, what is the S8's current update? Is it up to date? And that should give you a good idea as to how important to the manufacturer updates are. Because if that was their most recent flagship device before they released the newest one, and they didn't keep it up to date, there's a really good chance yours isn't going to be updated as often either.
Yeah. And that's where I was heading with, since I've had every line before the current gen model, you kind of are familiar with it. So do your research. It's a quick Google search. It's, find somebody that's had that previous model phone. How often do you get updates? It's just, like I said, it's just take the time, do the research, and, it'll pay off in the long run.
It really, really will. So I want to, let's do that. Let's continue on with our little thought process of different tips for security. And I'll jump in, I'll give one, and then we'll just go back and forth. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
All right. So my number one tip that we actually touched on earlier when we were talking about Facebook is be aware of to what permissions an application is asking for.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that in the settings of the app or in the settings of your phone and go to the apps and look at that individual. It's under permissions for that application. And there should be, on the most recent version of Android and last year 7.0, you'll have on and off toggles. And let's just take Facebook, for instance. It had 5 different permissions. Personally, I turned all of them off except for storage. And that's so that I could upload a picture without being stopped in the process. I didn't care for it to have access to my contacts or my phone log or SMS or my camera. Now I know you can go live on your phone and it needs permissions to your camera to do that. I either use it so rarely or I'm going to push it and make it ask me again when it wants to do that. And that's ultimately what the app was built to do. If it doesn't have permission and it wants to use a system function, it's going to have to ask you before it just blatantly lets it. So that's my tip. Look into those apps and see, what are they really wanting permission to?
Yeah, that's a good tip.
What's your number one tip for security?
Well, as far as security goes, most phones now come with two-factor authentication. I'd highly recommend it because it just gives an extra step. It's one extra step to get into certain things, whether it be accessing, adding a device to your Google profile. If you have to go back and factory reset your phone or something like that, that extra step really helps. So basically, what you're doing is you're allowing Google to not only give you the basic login that you would normally have to these settings and whatnot, but it'll also send you a text message with a code that you have to input. That way, like I said, you can make sure everything is secure. If somebody does happen to have your phone and they go in and try to do a factory reset on it to turn around and sell or whatever they want to do, they'll have a little bit more trouble doing that because, of course, they won't have the second step, which more than likely is going to be a code text to you. So always use the two-factor authentication.
I personally use that. And it's gotten in the way sometimes, but I love the comfort feeling of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you said, if you're in a hurry or rush or something, I know I've been in a bind sometimes where I'll have a new device on me and I need to get access to my email real quick, try and set up my Gmail account. Well, now you got to wait for another text message to come in to input a code. But it's good knowing that feature's there and it's there to help you in the long run.
Absolutely. Well, the next tip I have is on your Android device, there should be something in the settings called Find My Device. And it's an on-off switch. And if it's off, ultimately that means that if you lose your device, you couldn't do anything about it. But if it's on, you can go to a computer and go to Android's Find My Device website and log in with your Google account or your Gmail account, and it'll list the devices that are under your account and have it turned on. And you can ping it, you can lock it down, you can remotely wipe it, you can use a map to discover where's it, pinging from last. And I've never had to use this from a perspective of I had a device stolen, but I have used it in the perspective of my daughter's phone was lost, and it helped me find it instantly. So it really does save time and money. So make sure you go into your settings and enable Find My Device. It'll come in really handy in a pinch. Have you ever had to use Find My Device under a real true security issue?
Yeah, not for me personally though, but there are times that I do have to use it for for what I do for a living. So yeah, and it helps out a lot. We get a lot of times people think that their phone is stolen or something like that. And it's just a simple ping of the phone going into it and finding a location, sending the last known good location that is set up. And then it's like, oh yeah, I forgot I left it, in my car or something like that. And so yeah, it's very helpful. I highly recommend it. And, I really don't understand, especially like I said, working in a environment like that, why people don't enable that to begin with. I mean, it does nothing but help you in the long run. Everybody misplaces their phone at least once. So, having that there to be able to find it more easily, I think it's very nice.
So to answer that question, I have had people tell me that they didn't enable it because they thought because it has to have location services enabled that it was going to kill their battery faster. So they would choose to turn off the Find My Device. In the thought process was, if I turn off Find My Device, it's not pinging my location, and therefore it's not killing my battery. Where I had to show them where that's not necessarily the case, because it uses more than just GPS.
Mm-hmm.
It can use Wi-Fi, it can use your cellular signal. So it doesn't have, it won't necessarily kill your battery by being turned on because of the multiple ways it can use to locate your device.
Right.
So turn it on anyway. It's not going to kill your battery. Definitely. What about, let's see here. I also wanted to talk to just kind of ease some people's minds about what is Android, or what is Google doing to Android to help with security. And last year they implemented something called Google Play Protect. Have you ever heard of this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so ultimately that is their Play Store application scanning process. They want to try to catch apps on their Play Store that could be malware or virus contained or Trojans before they even get on your phone. And that's a really good thing, because not only will it scan the apps that have been uploaded to the Play Store, but it will also scan apps you've already downloaded to your phone.
Yes.
To make sure that you don't already have an app that is a virus contained malware or Trojan horse. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So like you said, it's not only for apps that are already in the App Store, but apps that you already have downloaded on your phone. It's just as simple as going into the settings, I think is clicking on full scan. Then after that, it just scans your whole device for any threats that are on there. And that's where, when I said two-factor authentication, I was kind of on the fence of either picking that or picking the other thing I had in mind, which was, only using apps from the Google Play Store, because Google's enabling this and helping preventing apps that may have malware or, maybe malicious from getting on your phone. So, that's the one thing that Google does, is it allows you to install applications from unknown sources. So you see a lot of these third-party app stores pop up that don't have the same security levels that Google has put onto their Play Store.
Personally, I do not install apps from a third party unless I know where it came from.
Yeah.
I have trusted sources, and that's how I look at it. I know it says in the settings unknown sources, and that's like a on-off toggle. If you don't have that turned on and you try to download an app from the internet, or even that, I get it whenever I download a saved application from Dropbox.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't have that turned on, it stops me dead in my tracks, and I have to. It forces me to go there, turn it on, and it's called unknown sources. But the way I think of it is, I only turn it on and allow it if it's a trusted source. Say I've got an app on my Dropbox account because that app is no longer supported on the Google Play Store, for instance. And I love that app. So I made a backup of it and I save it in my Dropbox. Well, when I put it on a new phone, it's not on the Google Play Store. So it's going to stop me dead in my tracks, and I have to choose allow. And that's great, because that will keep you safe from the internet too. If something's trying to download and install simply because you clicked on a link from a text message or spam or phishing or an email or something like that, that turned off will just stop it dead in its tracks, and it won't infest your phone, if you will, unless you make a conscious decision to go in and let it happen.
Yeah, and you're starting to see manufacturers take advantage of that situation where they'll, when you have to enable the unknown source setting, it'll ask you, do you want to only do it for this one instance, or do you want to do it for every instance? So if you're just selecting one instance, it's going to ask you every time you try to install something. So
that's great. That's something manufacturers have gone above and beyond to keep secure, because Android, I don't believe by itself on my Pixel 2, I don't think it gives me that option. I think it's an on or an off, and it's not this instance or every instance. So that's good. I like that. Is that on your Samsung?
Samsung, yeah.
Excellent. I wonder if LG does the same thing. That would be good if they did.
Yeah.
So that Google Play Protect, that's on Android 7.0 or higher. And you have to have the most recent, I'm sorry, not the most recent. You have to be using Google Play Services 11 or more recent than that. If you have a phone that's, let's say, older than 2016, you really need to check your updates and see if you have a waiting update in order to enable this option. If it's older than 2016 or definitely older than 2015, there's a good chance you may not have it. So go ahead and look into your phone's history and its settings and see if it can be updated to enable this option. Mm-hmm. All right. I got a personal pet peeve. I just got to touch on this real quick. I know some phones, I think Samsung, maybe you got the S9. They used to have apps on their phone that just out of the box that used to touch on RAM management. Mm-hmm. You know where I'm going with this?
Yes.
So RAM management basically means it wants to try to kill background applications that could potentially be using more resources or more battery than it should. And it's going to try to make that decision on your behalf. And the reason why I hate this is because Android operating system already has really good RAM management built in. So if you have an app fighting against the Android operating system trying to do the same thing, you could just imagine it's using more resources than what it's trying to save, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like you're trying to, I don't know a good analogy for it, but you basically, like you said, you have two programs on your device doing the same thing. So if you think about it, if two applications trying to run and do this, have the same goal in mind, you're really going to start seeing a big hit on things like your battery usage and whatnot. You're just going to see a big drain in those things. And if it's already implemented by Google and it's built into these devices, then, why is there a need for it from other places?
So I just thought of something. People may not understand exactly what is the RAM management supposed to do. So let's say you jump back and forth between 2 or 3 applications. One is Facebook, one is a game, one is another social media. When you go between apps, RAM is going to allow you to pick up where you left off. If it gets kicked out of RAM, say because this RAM management tool kicks it, just basically force closes the application because it thinks it's using up too much memory. When you jump back to that app, you're going to have to start from scratch. You're going to have to find the place where you left off. It's going to close it for you, which means when you reopen it, it's going to have to reload, and then you may lose your place in this in time. Take for a game, for instance, it could not save it for you. Take Facebook, for instance. They're notorious for if you jump back to Facebook, it automatically will refresh your timeline.
Everything.
Oh, I hate that. But
Yeah.
that's not just Facebook. That's also the RAM management doing that.
Exactly. You know how many times I've been it's ticked me off doing that is, going out of it and going back into it and go, oh, I need to, I just saw a post I passed. I need to go back to it. And then you go back into Facebook and it's refreshed to something new and you can never find that post again or who posted it. That's irritating.
Very irritating. And you can reduce this. You can't remove it, but you can reduce that type of impact by not using additional RAM management applications.
Yeah. Most carriers or manufacturers now have the ability to either uninstall or hide these, what we call, these out of the box apps that come installed. So, like I said, it's already implemented in the phone. There's no need to have two running at the same time, doing the same thing.
And along the same thought process, I kind of feel the same way about any antivirus applications. This kind of goes back to the thought we were having about the clickbait talking about Android vulnerabilities, and you read all the way through it, and at the end they're just saying, here, if you install our antivirus app, it's going to help you with all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we've already discussed how Google already builds in their own virus protection. Why have a separate, or even spend your money on a separate antivirus application? And to be very honest with you, what it's going to do is it's going to raise more concerns that are false positives than it is actually true vulnerabilities.
Yeah. With Google Play Protect already going and scanning not only applications in the Play Store, but also applications that were on your phone. Not only does it scan those applications that are on your phone, it will also scan applications that were installed from third-party app stores as well. So it doesn't have to come from the Play Store. If it's installed on your phone, Google Play Protect will go ahead and scan it. I think the virus protection thing was real big back in the early days of Android, when it was like, oh, Google open source and all this stuff, and you're more vulnerable than you are with Apple because Apple's more protective of what gets on their their app store and all this yada yada. So virus protection back in the early days of Android, I think, was more of a big thing. Now, people still use it because that's what they're used to doing, because they've been, whether they've been on Android their whole life or whatnot. But it's really with what Google's implementing inside of their OS now, with the, like you said, with the RAM management tools as well, that's already built in, and with Play Protect, there's really no need for this. Where most people get these, where people are more vulnerable with their phones is, I would say, probably downloading from third-party apps, these applications that are not verified. So if the software is already there to protect you, there again, there's no need to have something else running that's just going to drain your battery as well.
Well, you hit on a very important fact. So it was an issue, or primarily an issue way back when, but there's several people who just continue to load it because they bought it a long time ago and they still own it, and they just reload it anyway. And it is more or less it becomes a battery hog, but because it doesn't scan itself, the RAM management tool doesn't tell you to close it. It wants to keep running.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is, those are the battery hogs.
Battery hogs, memory hogs, all of those. Like you said, they don't scan themselves. So yeah, there's no need to have these programs now. And it's just, like I said, I'm just baffled by it whenever I hear people still using this, these applications.
Somewhat of a facepalm moment whenever
it kind of is.
Family's phone or family member's device or something like that.
I think,
where did I go wrong?
Yeah, they see the name from their PC or something, like whether it be Avast or Kaspersky or something, Norton. It's like, oh, well, they make an Android app, so definitely got to keep my phone protected.
Norton, I used to get the on my computer, I used to get the Norton pop-ups all the time about, we now have an Android app, right? So you just have to ignore those. Hey, you got kids, right?
Yes, 3.
How many kids you got?
3.
Do they have any Android devices?
Let me think about it. We have so many.
I'll tell you, mine do. And I got 2 kids, and they both have their own Android devices. And I'm sure you've got tips you can share as a parent to help keep your kids safe, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that us as parents can do.
My number one thing is before I give my device, an Android device to my kid, I go into the Play Store settings and I turn on parental controls.
Hmm.
Ultimately, that allows me to decide what rating level do I think my kids should be able to access. And this doesn't just not stop them from installing it, it actually stops them from seeing it in search results. So, for instance, if I've set my kids to 10 plus, but they do a search for, I don't know, honestly, I can't think of one that's say a mature rating, but they do a random search and there is one out there that could be mature rated. It won't even show up in their search results. So there's no scares to, they could accidentally come across a bad app.
Right.
And I'd go another step further and I implement passwords on purchases. So that's a huge thing. They in-app purchases for
Yes.
like coins or to move forward to the next level or to skip the 10 minutes you have to wait, they want money. And every time it asks you to, if you don't have this password thing set up, your child could just click on it and it hit whatever credit card you've implemented into the account.
Oh yeah.
And you don't even know it.
You hear horror stories about that on the news all the time about
All the time.
somebody racked up $10,000 and Fortnite, whatever downloads or something, and it's always out there. So,
and the easiest way is to put a password on the account and never make sure you always choose ask every time. There's an option that says something like, don't ask for the next 15 minutes or don't ask for the next 30 minutes. No, don't ever touch that button.
Yes.
Ask every single time.
Yeah. And the good thing about the parental controls for the Google Play Store as well is it also works for movies and I believe music to that degree. So you can set up a filter on there saying that they can't download or watch anything above a certain rating. So it goes beyond just, well, I don't want them to charge something on my credit card. I mean, Google's done a good job with implementing, giving parents a better control of what their kids are doing on their devices.
On the flip side of that coin, though, let's say it's a free app that matches the search results and you've already put in rating security. So it's for my kids' instance, it'd be a 10 plus rated app. If it's free, though, you kind of got to play the honesty game there. You got to teach your kids. What I do is I teach my kids, you don't install anything on your device without running it by me first.
Right.
That's the honesty rule. You as a parent, I'm sure you've come up with a way to punish your kid if they do something that you explicitly tell them not to do, right?
Yes.
That's how I think about it here. I've explicitly told them, don't install an app that you haven't run by me first, and there could be punishments if I find out that you do. And that's where the honesty rule comes in.
It does. And, since we're on the topic of parental controls, I guess you can say, it goes above security. If you read a lot of articles on the internet like I do, and, everything we read on the internet is true. So, so you hear about more and more kids at a younger age are spending more and more time behind a device, and how that's not healthy for them for their future. There's a plethora of apps out there in the Play Store that you can download that will help you get better control of that. So you can limit, screen time for your children. Not only that, you can limit what apps they can use for how long, or even if the app is downloaded on their phone, you can say, well, never mind. It's, you can't use it even though you have it installed. So there are apps out there that will help you with things like that.
Absolutely. I like the time management one myself. My Wi-Fi, I have the Google Wi-Fi, and I can specify which device, and I can just cut it off on an instant if I want to without cutting off the entire internet. I can just say, nope, pause Wi-Fi to this particular device for whatever reason I want to. I don't know. I called them to dinner and they didn't hear me. So I paused their internet on their tablet and they'll come running out saying, but Dad, something's wrong with the internet. And I'll say, yeah, I know what it is. Now come eat.
Yep. Yeah, that's funny you say that. I was having this conversation with another parent the other day. I actually use the Eero mesh system, um, which integrates well with Android and also Apple devices as well. Um, they're easy, home mesh systems are real cool. Google's got one like you have, Eero, and there's a couple other ones. Easy setup, and then you just go on there and download the app on your phone, and then you have full control of your network. So, like you said, what I do is I make a profile for everybody in my family. So everybody that is streaming something, playing games online or whatever, they have a profile set up. And there again, that's a form of punishment we have. So say my son does something, he's not supposed to at school and he gets in trouble. Well, that's part of his punishment is he can't use his devices for that weekend. How do I ensure that happens? I go to his profile, hit the pause button, and none of his devices can access the internet now. Another thing that you can do as far as time management is you can set up schedules for your profiles. So let's say that bedtime's at 9 o'clock at night. Well, if I go to bed, how do I know that he's not, waking up and doing something he's not supposed to? Well, I can set the schedule up, say from 9 o'clock till 8 a.m. Those devices can't access the internet. And that's how it does it. And it works to a T. So those are good things to have.
That's absolutely right. And I think it's important for your children to realize that these devices are a privilege, not a right or an entitlement. That's how I look at it.
Oh, yeah.
I got to ask you a question. I think that there's different ways to go about doing this particular function. And I'm not sure how you do it. I have a hard time sometimes keeping up with their device if they were to have it lost or stolen.
Mhm.
So my solution was I'll put my account on their phone, but I'll create another separate account for the kid, another Google account for the kid that ultimately I turn off all the syncing from my account. Like they don't want to see my email, they don't want to see my anything ultimately. But this allows me to find their device under my account if they were to lose it. But it also restricts their YouTube search history to mess up my YouTube search history. Or you know how Google likes to suggest things and ads on websites that you go on based on your search
all the time. Definitely.
So it kind of helps keep the two separated. And in a way, it allows me to log into their account and see what their search history looks like. Right?
Yes.
Do you have a different way of doing it?
No, it's basically the same way. I have my profile set up, all syncing disabled. But what that allows me to do is I can, if I want to do, say, search for my phone or something like that, when I log into my account, their devices show up under my profile as well. So I think that's a way for me to feel safe about it. I try not to abuse that, especially with my son getting older. I don't want to abuse that. So a lot of it's a trust thing, but it really can come in handy when, let's say, they lose their phone or something like that. And he has lost his phone plenty of times. So, it's just as simple as going to here, well, where was it last seen? Okay, so we know it's here. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I didn't know if there was another profile way of handling that or something to that nature.
I'm sure there is, but you and me are on the same page as far as how that works and how we do it.
Okay. Well, that's good. So I know that does sound scary, though. You would think that your kid may have access to your things, but you have full control over that too when you disable all the syncing mechanisms. I also disable any apps that are built into the device that I don't want them accessing. You as a parent, if you're going to choose to give a device to a child, I believe you have to take full control and responsibility over what they could or could not see on that device when it comes to either social media or even communicating with their friends. It's just we're getting beyond the Android security perspective, but it's kind of on the same topic that security is for your child on their device. I think that I've ran out of tips ultimately. I could probably, if I spent a couple of more minutes, I could maybe think of a few nitty-gritty details that I've done, but I think we've hit quite a bit, and I hope people have learned and gotten some good ideas as to how they can take control of their own devices and control their own security on their devices. You got anything to add?
No, I think we, like you said, we've touched on a lot. So There's definitely a lot of information out there. So if there's any questions or anything like that, just a quick Google search and see what you can find. But hopefully we've touched on a lot of those already.
Excellent. Well, if you do come up with any questions out there, guys, you can come check us out at www.androidanthem.com, and you can shoot us an email from that website under the contacts link, and we can email you back, or we'll discuss the question on our next podcast. We'd love to hear from you, to be very honest with you. I love getting feedback from the readers out there. But I really appreciate everybody hanging out with us today. Hope you learned something new about your own Android security. And Stephen, had a good time. Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
All right. Take it easy, everybody.